Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our May webinar, Working with LGBTQIA2S plus victim survivors. My name is Ana Maria Studer. I'm the Advocacy Support Program Manager here at Standpoint, and my coworker Raylene is also on the background helping with the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to check it out on Standpoint YouTube page. And the link it's also will be emailed out to our Standpoint Legal Advocates listserv later on. My role today is to help facilitate the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll pass the question along to the panelists. Most of you probably already know about a Standpoint, but for those that listen to this webinar later, or those that don't know, Standpoint is a statewide organization. We are a team of attorneys and advocates working to assist individuals who have experienced domestic violence, sexual violence, or human trafficking when it includes domestic or sexual violence. We also provide assistance to system professionals who work with survivors. And we do this by facilitating trainings and answering calls through our action line. The trainings that we do are the new laws training that we do every year throughout the whole state of Minnesota. And as a head ups, we are getting ready to send the save the date flyer. It will be coming soon. Please keep an eye on it. We also do the monthly webinars like this one that we are offering today, and other trainings by request. Our action line is answered Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And it is through the action line that our attorneys provide legal advice to survivors, and our advocates connect callers with resources. We do safety planning. We listen and help callers identify possible options and what steps to take. We have a wonderful panelist today for this webinar. We have C. Michael Menge from OutFront, Minnesota. We have Sei Yang from Transforming Generations. And we also have Eli Vega, that is our underserved population support advocate from Standpoint. Welcome all, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. We will also have likely one more panelist joining us who's just having some technical difficulty. Thank you to the panelists and interpreters for joining us today. This is Ellie speaking now. So I would like to have us start by just having each of the panelists kind of talk a little bit about yourself, your organization, and how you serve LGBTQIA2S plus victim survivors.
I'm happy to hop in. I'm C. Michael. Menge is my last name. My pronouns are they, them, and he, him. I like to say, feel free to mix it up mid-sentence, have some fun with it. I do. I always hope other people do too. I work at OutFront, Minnesota in our anti-violence program. I'm the community advocacy and training specialist, which is a fancy way of saying that I support the work of our anti-violence program, which I'll talk about here in just a second. And I also lead trainings for other violence advocacy organizations, nonprofits, and sometimes corporations and community at large as well. So quick elevator pitch about OutFront Minnesota. We are the largest, oldest LGBTQ plus equity organization in Minnesota. We have 3 major departments. We work in policy and organizing, so down at the Capitol, to help pass legislation to improve the lives of all Minnesotans, but especially LGBTQ plus folks. And last year, we passed 2 significant pieces of LGBTQ plus specific legislation, making Minnesota a trans refuge state for folks who are fleeing their states and need to get gender-affirming medical care, as well as banning conversion therapy in the state of Minnesota, which is a harmful practice where people try to make LGBTQ plus folks stop being gay or stop being trans. It's often very violent and harmful. And we also work in religious organizing with congregations and faith spaces through our policy and organizing. We have an educational equity department that works with schools, school districts, GSAs. GSAs meaning gender sexuality alliances. If you are a millennial or older like me, you might remember Gay Straight Alliance, sort of updated terminology to be more inclusive, gender sexuality alliances. And then we work, our work in the anti-violence program, we directly serve victim survivors of violence across the entire state of Minnesota. And we have a helpline that's open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., much like the action line, where victim survivors can call, have peer counseling, or find there's sort of a wide array of support that we can offer folks, helping file orders for protection, accompanying folks to court sometimes, or if they decide to go the route of filing a police report, then we can attend the station with them sometimes, depending on staff capacity. Again, we're a small team for the entire state of Minnesota, so it sort of depends on what we're able to do in that moment. We're also sometimes through funding like ARPA, able, which is ARPA, able to offer direct financial support. So helping folks pay their rent if they're experiencing violence, or have a short-term hotel or motel stay as transitional housing as we try to get them into a shelter or find longer-term housing as well. We have a safe harbor youth specialist who works with youth who are being sex trafficked across the state of Minnesota. That program is just about to open, which is really exciting, because our safe harbor specialist, Yaya Flores, is going to be the only safe harbor specialist in the state of Minnesota who is LGBTQ+ specific. So really important work. Definitely need more folks doing it as well. I think everyone here could say that, but that is a little sort of intro to OutFront and some of the work that we do.
Passed over to Say.
Awesome. I'm happy to go next. My name is Say. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director at Transforming Generations. We're a culturally specific organization serving Hmong and Southeast Asian folks in Minnesota. We have a variety of different programs. We work with victim advocates, victim survivors through our advocacy program. We have a youth program, mental health program. We work with Hmong men who use harm, or what other people might call batterer intervention programming, called Siningya specifically for Hmong men. We just opened that to be national, just because there's no other existing space like that we know of. And then we have our queer justice program, which helps to support victim survivors who are LGBTQ+, youth who are experiencing homelessness or family violence, because after coming out, they may not be accepting, etc., experiencing violence at school, and then more about creating spaces for people who need the community after coming out and wanting to find other queer and trans folks as well. We have an office in St. Paul, but we are also out in the Hmong charter schools as well, providing on-site advocacy support for folks who need it. And then likewise, we also support funding folks who need help with rent and other basic needs support. Yeah, it's a little bit about us. We do some contract work, training other organizations, as well as providing specific trainings for folks who are wanting a specific area of focus. If they're like, hey, we want to know more about Hmong LGBTQ, can you come out and train about that? We'll do that. And the bulk of our work is about supporting Hmong folks. And so our work, our queer justice program, is very intersectional. I was considering, how do we hold Hmong identity, Hmong lived experiences alongside the queer experience as well. So that's a little bit about Transforming Generations.
Thank you. And Julie, you just joined. Would you like to speak a little bit about yourself, your work, and how you serve LGBTQIA2S plus victim survivors?
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. My name is Anjali Mishra Cameron. I am the Chief Executive Officer at SEWA-AIFW. So SEWA is Minnesota's largest South Asian serving nonprofit. So we have a broad scope of programming that is meeting our community's mission of total family wellness. And so that encompasses programs that focus on cultural context for our community. So South Asian includes the South Asian subcontinent, so India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and our most recent Afghan evacuees. And what is really important about that is that we always try and embed culture and community in the programs and services that we provide, because there are so many barriers to immigrant and refugee communities in terms of violence and survivorship support. And so we have a lot of programming that is safety net programming to meet those needs. So we also have senior programming for elders, and there's a component of elder abuse to that as well. We also have some basic needs services like a meal and nutritional support, a free health clinic. We have mental health services. And those services are meant for all of the different intersectional populations that we serve. And so we try and prioritize individual case management within our community, because recognizing that everyone's lived experiences look very different. And so we can't make assumptions that someone's experience within the queer community matches someone else's. And so making sure that we're tailoring program because of the complexity of diversity within our communities, religions, castes, all of those things, we are really honed into being attentive to that each individual has their own unique identity, and we need to honor that. And so within that, we have, in terms of our programming, we have over half of our programming is dedicated to gender-based violence, violence prevention, violence intervention and supportive services. There's a lot of components that go along with that, including whether it's legal support or housing, any kind of emergency support for victims of crime. And so all of those are really important, and especially important when we're talking about violence within our youth communities and within our we call them our South Asian Queer League. So our Shakal group, Shakal means face. And it is just an incredible program that we have at SEWA, where we create a safe space for community members. It is a queer only space, which is really important to us. We create identity only spaces, and then we'll welcome allies at some events, but it is really important that they have that sacred space to be able to gather together without any outside voices, so that they feel free and open to communicate things that even they may not want to share, even within an allied community. And that leads, all of those programs lead directly into our violence programming if they need that, if they need healthcare supportive services, employment supports, any of those other things. And so we try and see people first and then bring them into our various programs. We also have some refugee programming, which mimics our youth and our queer programming for that same reason.
Thank you. And thank you. This is Ellie speaking. And thank you all for the amazing work that you do. So I, as underserved population support advocate at Standpoint, my community of focus is the LGBTQIA2S plus community. And this panel is, and this conversation really is in an effort to increase awareness of the needs and challenges that face, or that queer survivors face when seeking services and in changing that or escaping the cycles of abuse. So I will kind of just pose some questions for us to talk about. What are some barriers that are unique to LGBTQ plus victim survivors in fleeing abuse, seeking support, accessing justice? And anyone can jump in.
I can start if we're establishing an order, just to make it a little bit more simple. I have some notes too, so please pardon me if I'm looking to the side a little bit. It's just so I don't hop on a soapbox and stay there. This is C. Michael speaking. One is that often LGBTQ plus folks exist in tightly podded communities. I think sometimes we think about LGBTQ plus community as this one unified community, and that is not how it plays out. And that's not specific to LGBTQ plus folks. I think that exists among a host of different identities and experiences. But the way that tightly potted communities tend to, that we see, at least in our anti-violence program, tend to show up in terms of violence is that there might be a lot of different ways in which a small group of people know each other. So often, sometimes you'll hear colloquially like, "Oh, haha, that's my best friend is my ex who's dating this other person, and or my coworker or my ex-coworker or so and so's ex-partner." And there might be many, many different ways that a small group of people know each other, which means then that if one or more people in that group are causing harm or being violent towards someone else in that group, it can feel really isolating for the person who's experiencing violence to reach out for support, because the person who is harming them or abusing them may be really well known by the people in their closest circle. And so they may feel like, I can't share that this person is harming me because I might not be believed because they're liked by the other people in this group or known by the other people in this group. Again, that's not unique to LGBTQ plus community, but we do often see that. There's also minimizing of violence between same gender pairs of people. So when two women are in a relationship and one of them is abusing the other one, we see sometimes people saying like, "Oh, it's a cat fight," or, "Oh, how much harm could a woman possibly do?" It's not actually that harmful because there's no man in the relationship. Men cause violence, women don't. Women are weak and powerless. And so it's a cat fight. Or we'll see if two men are in a situation. Oh yeah, I see. It's a roommate situation. Absolutely. In the chat, diminishing the situation. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. And this idea of a fair fight that we'll sometimes hear, it's a fair fight when someone is abusing someone else. Especially, we often see that when it's two men in a relationship and one man is abusing or harming one or more other men. It's like, oh, well, men are strong, so, he can take it, or he should have just fought back, and there's a lot of victim blaming that happens there. Almost a complete lack of resources for men of all origins also. And by origins, I mean whether a man is cisgender, meaning that he is the gender that he was assigned at birth, whether he is trans, meaning that he may have been assigned female at birth, grown up and realized, yeah, actually I'm a man, be a non-binary man or a two-spirit man. And two-spirit being native specific, we want to make sure that we're not using that term unless someone is indigenous to this land that we might call Turtle Island, also known as North America. But that includes shelter settings, violence resources. There are right now I think there is one program in Minnesota that explicitly a shelter program in Minnesota that explicitly is open to men who are victim survivors of violence. One, and there are 3 spots open in that, and it just opened in April. So definitely lots of room to make sure that men who are victim survivors of violence get resources. Making victim survivors teach their advocate about what their identities mean. For example, if I come to you because I'm experiencing domestic violence and I name that I'm non-binary and you don't know what that means, and you make me teach you what non-binary means, that is inappropriate, because I am here to get resources for domestic violence. I am not here to teach you about what my communities are or mean. That is a distraction from the more core and urgent issue at hand, which is me getting domestic violence support in that situation, which I have advice for what to do if someone names identities or experiences that they have that you don't understand. Yeah, Joseph in the chat, absolutely. Women's Advocates does have a new alternative shelter program. That is what I am talking about. It did just open on April 25th, and they do have only 3 spots available for LGBTQ plus folks men who are victim survivors of violence, folks who have different disabilities that may or may not impact their access to shelter too. So it will be expanding eventually. Yeah, Joseph. It will be expanding eventually. We're really excited about in our program. We're going to be reaching out and trying to find ways to support as our anti-violence program and OutFront to help support Women's Advocates program. And we're so glad that that exists. And we want to see more and bigger and expanding. And then briefly, lack of intersectionality, making people have to choose between parts of ourselves for support. So for example, I'm a Black trans person. My needs as a Black trans person might be a little bit different than a white trans person. And sometimes when we're talking about LGBTQ plus space, we assume that we're only talking about white people. And when that happens, that means that anyone who is not white or anyone who does not share that maybe middle class, white, cisgender, or transgender background that we're assuming that everyone has, when folks fall outside of that, sometimes we have to choose between parts of our identities in order to get support. Can I show up as my Black self and also my trans self at the same time to get support? Or do I need to put my Black self to the side for a moment because I need to code switch to speak whiteness in order to have access to resources? And then this last one that I'll name for now, as I'm sure we could all be on our soapboxes all day, this is why we have notes, is non-law enforcement options for how victim survivors can move forward. And again, that's not LGBTQ plus community specific, but what we often see, and we're a program that is abolitionist, meaning that we are not going to say, yes, absolutely, file a police report. The police will help you and never cause you harm and will help you actually get closer to feeling safer. We don't think about law enforcement in the United States as it currently is as a form of safety for everybody because it has not proven to be historically safety for everyone. So what we often, and we can still accompany victim survivors to file police reports. We follow their lead on that, but we're not going to say, yes, law enforcement will definitely be helpful for you or help build a sense of safety. So we often see victim survivors of violence who want other resources to move forward. Often the victim survivors that we work with don't necessarily want to see their harm doer or abuser go to jail or prison. Instead, they often just want to know that that person isn't going to cause someone else harm. So there are increasingly more programs such as transformative justice circles and healing circles and batterers intervention programs, like Shay was talking about. But we especially see folks who are looking for things other than like law enforcement and incarceration as ways to feel safe. And I will end there for now.
I will jump in and say yes to everything that just C. Michael just said. There were so many things that reflect the experiences within our community as well, in the South Asian experience. And so there are a couple of pieces that I really wanted to highlight out of that first and foremost. And one of them was around, I mentioned earlier that we do some emergency housing, and for our LGBTQIA plus community, we're South Asian serving. So when we have community members who are experiencing violence, one of the biggest challenges, and we see really high rates of homelessness within this group, to the point where, you know, it becomes, there's a homelessness and hopelessness tied together, that this is the only option that they have. There is nowhere else to turn, even as they're working with our advocates, because there's components to that. And one of them is what C. Michael touched on, is that there's the intersectionality of it is such that the LGBTQIA2 spirit plus community is so Eurocentric that it doesn't hear voices from our communities at all. The immigrant and refugee voices being a part of that is not is not a conversation that's had. That's why I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today, because that sense of hopelessness comes from both an experience where within our own South Asian community, there's significant discrimination, bias, unacceptance of our queer community. You know, and SEWA does a lot to try and stand right in the face of that. We have our Desi Pride Parade that celebrates it and emphasizes that we are here and going to support this community. We are a mainstream South Asian organization, but we stand by our queer community so that everyone understands that that is part of our mainstream community too, and it needs to be recognized. Then I think there's this other piece where those queer resources that are out there are so Eurocentrically focused that they don't recognize that there might be other experiences, that there needs to be cultural competency within those systems as well for BIPOC identifying folks when they are reporting abuse, that there's no, the cultural barriers that are in place for our communities, whether it's language, whether it's immigration status, is another complexity that no one is thinking about when they're thinking about queer supportive services and violence. And that's, we put them in touch with an immigration attorney because they experience violence in the same way that so many others do in terms of vulnerabilities that are played upon by abusers. And so it is all of these things coming together. It is some, we have a lot of really complex cases, and then layered on top of that is the fact that we have gotten to a point where for women and girls, there is some level of support within the South Asian community. But if you fall outside of those lines, and even if you're women identifying, there are still so many challenges out there. But one of the biggest things is that we don't have acceptance within our own community for our LGBTQIA2S plus community members, that that's where that sense of hopelessness will come from. And that is why we, at SEWA, we are very intentional about making sure that they know that this is a safe space. We wear our rainbows very loudly so that we are building into our community, into the South Asian Minnesotan community, that muscle of this is an accepted part of our community, so that no longer, we can't shift everything. We're not going to be able to shift some of the systems and structures that keep all BIPOC communities marginalized, but we do have some control over our own community and being able to bring that acceptance in. And so that's one of the things that we really work on. And then at SEWA, we have a broader scope of making sure that we are broadly in victim survivor supports, addressing language access, addressing systems that are culturally unwelcoming to all communities when reporting abuse, and an overall lack of awareness about our communities, whether it's in legislation or in advocacy, as those things are rolling out. Even if there are great supports coming through or new programs being established, they're still being established with outside of BIPOC communities, outside of queer communities. They're still not being inclusive of our communities. And I think that's another part that we are really working to shift.
This is Say. Oh my God, like you both nailed it. Everything you both said. And then I'll just add a little bit more pieces to it. But for I've been thinking as you all talk, and I'm like, a little bit of it, especially for Hmong folks, is the fear of being blamed, like victim blaming, and I think a lot about this because A lot of times in the Hmong community, if you're queer, your relationship is not recognized. And if it's not recognized when the violence happens, it's not recognized, and there's no process for accountability, right? If that relationship isn't even considered a relationship. And I think that there's a fear of like, if I tell my family that I'm experiencing intimate partner violence, the kind of blaming that will come, right? To be like, well, nobody told you to be queer, right? Why don't you just date the other, gender? And so the victim blaming happens. And so I think people are scared of that to come out. And I think that some of them may not be out and is scared of being outed as well. And so I think there's like a couple of these things that are more on the interpersonal level, like the individual stuff, right? I think also they're always considering intersecting violence. So a little bit of what our work is too is doing some adjacent deportation work. And so we recognize that a lot of victim survivors also are scared if the person they're dating isn't a citizen and they don't want to have this person be deported because they recognize that outside of the relationship, that person is still somebody's sibling or kid or of parent figure to somebody, right? And so they're also holding some of those nuances too in the fear system's involvement, especially when as BIPOC folks, the system has been a little bit more racist, right? And so there's a fear of like, oh my gosh, as a queer person, if you go into into prisons like that system, the way you experience violence is going to be different, right? So we're looking at okay, not only is there intimate partner violence, but state sanctioned violence, and so we're thinking about these pieces. If they have kids together and child protection is involved, like there's a real fear, right? As a queer relationship, queer of parenting, parent to think about what are the chances they'll take our kids away and how much we fought already to have these kids. In addition to that, we've also worked with folks who were in a heterosexual relationship, broke up, now in a same-sex relationship, and their ex-partner is threatening to take their kids away. And so they're scared of like, oh my gosh, I don't want this to be known because I don't want the other parent to come and take my kid or find a way to come and take my kid. And so they are holding a lot of these complexities right around family structures that oftentimes other programs aren't thinking about because our mindset goes to like a heterosexual couple, right? And even when it's two queer um, partners, same gender, people still move in that way, right? To say, oh, who's the guy in the relationship, or I always make assumption about, oh, the one that's more masculine presenting is probably the one causing harm. So there's a lot of stigma around there that we have to deconstruct and talk about and teach about as advocates. One unique aspect for the Hmong community that we've been looking at is what we call AIM victims. So victims who are, or let me back up and say AIM, AIM, stands for Abusive International Marriages. We just tack on the R, so it's to include relationships. But what we're seeing is, and that term came out from Hmong advocates that was talking about this trend we were seeing where older Hmong men will go to Southeast Asia and marry them and bring them over here, but isolate them, abuse them, that kind of thing. And so we're seeing that in our queer Hmong community as well, replicating those systems. And so that's something that we've been paying a lot of attention to, and figuring out how to support somebody who is a queer Hmong AIM victim who needs support here because their whole family is not here. And so there is real fear around talking about the violence, right? Because you have nobody here, and the person that you have and that is the person causing violence. And so we're holding all of those nuances together as well. And then, I think to your point earlier, right, C. Michael, you're talking about how we have different intersecting identities, and for me, I'm like, yes, that's like exactly it too, right? Is when people talk about LGBTQ, they just lump us all together like we're one thing. But a queer woman is going to experience violence differently, and her proximity to violence is different, right? She's experiencing sexism on top of patriarchal stuff and intimate partner violence. And so her interaction with even systems is going to be different, right? From somebody that is bisexual. You know, they're bisexual, but when they come through the programming, the services, they're going to be presenting as a heterosexual couple, right? But the violence that happens could have also been a lot of biphobia folded into that. And same thing as trans, right? Like your violence, the violence you're experiencing is going to be different from what cis folks are experiencing. And so we're looking like at, you know, each of those, right? To say, okay, uh, why would somebody who is a queer woman not access services versus somebody that's trans, right? And so I was considering that and thinking about, okay, how do we tweak our services and the way we talk about it so that it's welcoming and folks know that we are considering these different unique pieces of the alphabet, so basically, right? And so we're always considering all of that, and because of that, people access us for different reasons and at different points of violence, right? And for home folks, a lot of times, they've already gone for support and they're at their last, like, you know, straw, or this is their last help, you know, point of help, you know, that they get to us, right? And they've already gone through whatever internal mediation systems before actually getting into formal services. So I think that that's a really unique perspective for us to think about when we work with Hmong and Southeast Asian folks. Um, and then, you know, I think as an organization, because of this, we've actually created our own screening system to be like, okay, which organization has services for these people, but are actually informed and competent enough to serve that community? Which one is queer friendly, but doesn't actually isn't informed enough to serve, so we know how to match the services, right? Like if you're just needing quick case management, you know, we're like, okay, you know, you could go to this person to help you with this application. But if you're needing something deeper, advocacy support, somebody to go to court with you, we're going to be looking for the organizations that are queer informed, right? And so we've kind of had to learn and do that with our own programming as we've been building out, you know, the last couple of years. And we recognize that for our community, we haven't talked enough about intimate partner violence. And I think just within the last, I would say, if we looked at the queer Hmong timeline movement, we've spent so much energy in the you know 2000s really trying to build visibility, representation, getting people to accept us, that talking about intimate partner violence was not right the thing that we were talking about, because we wanted people to accept us, right? And so now we're entering into this movement moment that's like we actually have to talk about intimate partner violence, and that means we have to create content and we have to teach about it, and we have to talk about it within the context of the queer Hmong community, because I think a lot of folks don't realize they're victims of domestic violence until they come into our spaces, right? And so we have like our Pride Barbecue, we have our Drag on Talent mentorship programs, our like drag tale times for families to come and read together. You know, it's through those programs that then they start to realize, oh, actually, I am a victim, and even if I'm queer or trans, I could still experience domestic violence. And so we're actually needing to create more content, more knowledge, more awareness around all of that to bridge the gap for our community as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Can we respond a little bit? Just to
Yeah,
say,
for
like,
sure.
yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you saw like the amount of nodding that we were doing while you were talking too, but like, absolutely. If I can too, just like lift up even more a few of the things that you were saying, like, I mean, essentially everything that you just said, I'm like, absolutely, like those are the same experiences that we're having in our program of people are at their last, we're their last resort. Either people aren't advocacy organizations don't have the cultural competency, and so it's just too painful, and they're being harmed in different ways while they're trying to get support for harm. Or people aren't responding to their emails and phone calls because everyone is so overloaded and the capacity and the need are not matched. This is C. Michael speaking, also, sorry. And to just like jump back and lift up a couple more things. Polyamory isn't something, or non-monogamy is not something that's specific to LGBTQ plus communities, but it is something that lots of LGBTQ plus people are in non-monogamous relationships, meaning that they're in relationship structures that are more than just one other partner. And that means, because there's not a lot of acceptance or understanding of non-monogamous relationships and polyamorous relationships, that similarly to what you were saying, say, and especially if you layer in any kind of other cultural background, I'm Black. There is lots of like anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment in Black community, and I think that lots of BIPOC communities could say that because of colonization, and we forget like European folks often beat gender difference and variety and different sexual orientations out of our cultures, and then are some of the first people to be like, actually, actually LGBTQ plus people do exist and do deserve support and services, and then they get centered even though our communities and our cultures were the ones that are being out. But with polyamory, because of the lack of understanding, people say, well, it's your fault for being abused, or it's your fault for being harmed. You shouldn't have been in a relationship like that anyway. If you weren't, then it wouldn't have been your fault. As you were saying too about outing, just to jump back, I'm gonna put the LGBT power and control wheel in the chat. It's really old, everybody. It's really old. It was, and by really old, I'm sorry, I'm a millennial. I mean the early 2000s. I'm sorry if that is offensive to anyone on the call. I'm 28. I'm sorry. I work with Gen Z a lot. But it is, this is from a website called loveisrespect.org. I'd recommend their website to look around. They've got some cool resources for folks looking for healthier communities, looking to build healthier relationships. But it also goes through some of the ways that violence might show up in LGBTQ plus communities that might be different than in heterosexual or cisgender communities. Thank you. I think I just sent that to hosts and panelists. So thank you, Raylene. Yeah, it's outdated. The language is outdated, but it has some more examples of ways that outing can also be used as a form of violence. And then just very briefly that I think in LGBTQ plus communities specifically, as Say was saying too, there is this, I think sometimes as a means of being like, yay, our community isn't celebrating us. It'll be like, oh yeah, like heterosexual people, cisgender people, so dysfunctional, but us, we're good. Like we're healed, we're healthy, we're all safe to be around. Violence doesn't happen here. That's not true. And there can be that feeling of like, well, everybody else is having a wonderful, healthy relationship, and I am in this relationship. It must be my fault, or I must not have known the signs. This must be my fault. Just to highlight a few of the things that you were saying, but everything that you were saying about like the like culturally specific and intersectionality of the ways in which violence doesn't get addressed in this Eurocentric, as we were saying earlier, space is absolutely what we see in our program too.
Yeah, this is Say. I'm just like really living off of this energy because I'm like, yes, see, Michael, Anjali, you all get it. Like it feels really good. But to your point, I want to not even respond, just like add more to it, right? About the polyamory piece, I think it's so important for us to talk about it because it exists in all communities, in across different sexual orientation or whatnot, right? But the very specific thing about polyamory in the queer and trans community, and I really got this from my colleague Sang, who talked about like the demonizing of queer folks, right? And so I think a lot about how our as queer folks, polyamory relationships are often viewed in such a like just like we're demons, you know, such a dark way. And then with sexualization, right, hypersexualization, and objectification, I think all of those, I don't know if we call it like mini micro aggressive violence, right, that comes with it, as well. So I think that's such a unique piece about when we talk about polyamory in the queer and trans community.
I wanted to add, this is so amazing. We could just keep going on. But so there are a couple of other things that just came up too, and that is this, another category of just, the polyamory thing is something that we have seen as well, but it fits into this broader, let me start by saying in a lot of South Asian communities, there is still the cultural practice of arranged marriages. And so I think most people are familiar with that concept now in the US. And so, in a lot of South Asia, we have arranged marriages. And one of the complexities of that across all of our survivors is forced marriages amongst immigrant and refugee communities, the multi-generational component of that, as well as if you're forced into a marriage that doesn't fully acknowledge your true self, on top of abuse that might occur in the marriage. And then there's a multi-generational component of and this is true for other API communities as well, that families weigh in on marriages. It's not just a marriage is not between just those who are married. It is between an entire family. And so people are weighing in and putting on a sense of shame within that marriage and a sense of pressure. And you will no longer have a family if you identify this way, if you break off your marriage, if you don't accept what is happening to you. That is your lot in life. We hear a lot of, you deserve this because you were choosing to live this lifestyle, and we have created a nice marriage for you. Those kinds of things we experience, we see all the time with our queer identifying folk when they are part of those forced marriages between families. And so really the shame and pressure that they feel, especially amongst our younger folks and second and third generation, where they feel like they can communicate that out. There's so much pressure placed on them, not just from a partner perspective, but from an extended family perspective. And then extended out of that, we also see intimate and non-intimate partner blackmail, because we have a community. We are the 7th largest community in Minnesota, but we are still a community where we're closely connected and people know one another and know families. And so blackmail around closeting, I think Shay, you mentioned that earlier, and that is something that we really see a lot of within those forced marriages or within that that space too, because there's so much of this. A lot of our South Asian cultures have this culture of shame, and it prevents services across the board for all victim survivors. But this idea of saving face, which is why Shakal is such an important name for our South Asian Queer League, because of that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to touch on those things. I do have to say that I am a stand-in here because our incredible gender-based programming executive co-director, Mubina Qureshi, could not be here. She's actually out of the state right now. And so Mubina does absolutely beautiful work on this. And so I'm trying to just do her justice and all of the incredible work that she does.
Thank you. This is Ellie speaking. And thank you all for such thoughtful and thorough answers. And I think all of you kind of highlighted the need for nuance and creative solutions, creative options, and more flexible options when seeking safety and justice for queer victim survivors. I want to move on to one of our questions so we can make sure we have time for participant questions at the end if there are any. What are some things that advocates or other professionals can do to make LGBTQIA2S plus victim survivors feel safe and respected when they reach out to us?
I'll hop in. I'll try to be brief. I would say one, thank people for sharing parts of their identities and experiences with us. This is C. Michael speaking. When someone shares a piece of their identity, their cultural background, their sexual orientation, their gender identity with us, they're leaning towards connection with us and they're wanting to trust us. And that is a vulnerable piece of themselves that they may or may not have been policed, abused, discriminated against for. And starting with saying, thank you so much for trusting me enough to share that with me when people share parts of themselves is, I think, an acknowledgement that we don't give often enough, whether that be in advocacy space or in our everyday lives when we're meeting people as well. I would say ask what might support look like for you in this space for folks. Sometimes when we're talking about LGBTQ plus experience, we think if I don't know what 2S LGBTQIA plus means and what everything and that plus might hold, is, then I can't properly support this person, or we center our own fear of harming someone else. Like, oh, you're trans, I don't know how to support you. I'm so nervous, I'm not even going to actually engage with you or use any of your pronouns if you share pronouns, for example. But instead, I want to encourage us, you do not have to know everything. Please do your homework when you can, right? Like learn more about the communities around you, your neighborhood, the neighborhoods that touch your neighborhood, right? Like it's not, especially if you are a cis white heterosexual person or just a cisgender heterosexual person in general, learn more about the people around you. You can start small. You can start with knowing your neighbors or knowing more about your neighborhood or what communities exist there. But you don't have to know everything. And I know that can be hard for the perfectionists among us or the ones who care so deeply for others that we don't want to cause any harm ever. But we in our program try to encourage people, instead of thinking safe space, we think safer space, right? We think we are working towards making this space safer all the time. We do that by not just doing our homework to learn more about communities and experiences, but by treating people as individuals, asking that question of what does support look like for you in this space, giving folks an opportunity to respond. If they don't know what support might look like for them in that space, you offering things that you know are within your power, control, influence, comfort, or within your level of discomfort that you're willing to go into to support that person. That you knowing what trans means in general is not helpful for me specifically if you're working with me specifically. You need to know what my needs are in that space. And when we ask, what does support look like for you in this space? Listen to the answers. Listen to the answers. And try to fulfill those things as much as you possibly can. That includes leveraging your privileges, your title, your influence to get folks the support that they deserve. I think sometimes if we're not in manager or supervision roles at our organizations or in our communities, we think, well, what power do I have, right? What power do I have to really help advocate for you to get immigration support that is specific to your asylum case as an LGBTQ plus person? But I want to encourage us, try to swing your weight around more than you think you have weight, right? Like folks are risking their comfort, their stability, their need to come to us and get support and services. And I think some of the least that we can do is after they share what they need with us, to meet them where they're at, not where we think they should be at, not where we hope that they are at some point, and to use as much of what is in our power as community members, as advocates, as professionals, as folks in religious and faith spaces as well, to try to help people get their needs met. And then just sort of general advocacy frameworks center someone's humanity over their identity label. It is, if you are someone who's like, I don't think that non-heterosexual people, queer, trans, bisexual, pan, right? Any other sexual orientation other than heterosexuality, if you don't, for some reason, agree with or understand, that doesn't negate that every human being is that, a human being, deserving of dignity, care, community, respect, and resources. And so as often as we can say, you are not an identity label, you are not a political issue, you are a specific human being who's deserving of all of those things, and centering that in our responses to folks, I think the better off that we will always be, whether we have biases against those groups of people, whether we don't understand where someone is coming from, we can always center the thing that connects all of us, which is that we are humans worthy of those things. And avoiding victim blaming as often as possible. You can't outsmart violence, you can't outsmart abuse. People of all economic, education, religious, racial, cultural backgrounds experience abuse, and it's not because they're stupid or didn't, know any better. It's not their fault. If someone's going to be abusive, they're going to be abusive. And often harmful people are really charming to other people, right? Really might have lots of support or be well known and well liked by others. It's not that person's fault that they're experiencing abuse and harm. And hopefully that is baseline for the folks who are in this call, but just to name, those are a few of the things.
Again, incredible. There were so many things that C. Michael touched on that were just absolutely right on. And I think about seeing the humanity first as being the first and foremost, because the communities that we work with have such complex identities across, we work with an ethnic group, but there's, different ethnic groups within the broader South Asian community. There are religions, there's a caste system for certain religions. There's all sorts of, there's so much complexity. And then adding, assumptions about someone's gender, sexual orientation on top of that. I think really being open and seeing them person first. What do you need? And creating that space for them to tell you what they need is the most critical thing, because if we are making any assumptions about that person's lived experiences, we've already lost a little bit of that process and of recognizing their humanity. And so being really opening and listening first, for some of our survivors, we know them for 6 months before they even come forward as a survivor. Trust is not given, it is earned. And we as an organization recognize that we are there to create that safe space first. And then when you feel ready, tell us what we can do to help you. And so that piece is so important, because we want to make sure that we serve that whole person fully and not just give them partial supports. I think for our community, one of the other things that is really pernicious is this model minority myth that Asian Americans are high achieving, that, for the South Asian community, everyone's a doctor or an engineer. And, intimate partner violence is in the queer community in Wayzata. It is everywhere. It is something, these things are not, no amount of education, no amount of money can change these things. These are, whatever higher power you believe in, God or whatever, smatters these things universally. And so they are everywhere. And so we want to make sure that we are combating those stereotypes in this process as well, and actively supporting our community members where they are at. And so debunking that model minority myth is so critical in this process, because there are a lot of people suffering, but it is not seen within the community because they see us as a community that is doing well, that does not have any issues. And so that makes it such a problem for those who are seeking support to be able to say that. And it goes back to that comment I made earlier on fear and shame of coming forward and admitting that you need help. And so that's where creating those safe spaces is the most critical piece, and earning that trust.
This is Say. I could also add a little bit to it. I think, yes, to what you both shared, and like, how can we, I think if you're a person in some kind of decision making, power, right, have some decision making power, like, how do you bring ongoing trainings for your staff? And how do you think through like even the workflow, right? How does that look like? Like, hire queer and trans folks, but also like don't tokenize them to be, the one that sees all the queer and trans participants that come in, right? How do you train your whole team to be equipped to work with them? Because we don't want to tokenize them. We don't want our queer and trans staff to burn out too, right? And everybody, it should be a standard that everybody that works in your organization is competent enough and knows enough and invested enough to continue learning, so they can actually service that community. And if your organization is not actually equipped to work with them, make a warm referral instead of trying to stumble through the whole process of supporting them, because that's actually more harmful to them than if you just made that warm referral. And bring in, I mean, I'm speaking for both of you, but bring in any of us to come in and do some TA support, right? Because we're thinking of our community, and we don't want them to experience more harm once they get to safety or services, right? At our organization, the way we're training is we're looking through like even the intake process, all of that, right? Like, when you work with somebody, how do you ask the pronouns they use, but also consider like, when I'm calling your house, is that still the pronoun you want me to use, right? What name are you using here, right? And when we call home, is that the name you want us to use? When we're in court, do you want us to use their legal name, right? So getting like thinking ahead about those things already, so that once they come in, they know that you've already been thinking about it and you're holding all of those pieces, right? Even looking at your safety planning, like, for us, we're not just looking at how do you keep yourself safe from the person causing you harm, but how are we looking at intersectional violence again, right? Like, if you are a queer Hmong woman in the middle of the night fleeing, what are the safety things, right? Because you're not safe fleeing in the middle of the night, walking out in public, right? Same thing for a trans woman, right? Like, how are we thinking about these things in our safety planning? And when we're doing safety planning, how do we look beyond just biological family, right? Understanding that folks have chosen families, or they may not even be in connection with their biological family anymore. And that goes with like emergency contact too, right? People often want you to put in somebody that is a biological family. So we're thinking about all of these things ahead of time. And building it into our system so that when they get to us, we already have thought about all of that for them, right? And we're supposed to be the one helping them. So of course we need to be prepared, right? To say, hey, these are all the things that we're thinking about. And we know that in your life, you're also thinking about all of that as well. So I would say that, and then language is so important. For us as Hmong people, we don't have a term for um, queer, for LGBTQ, we're adopting language from other places. And so we're kind of in this space of like recreating what terms we would like to be called, right? That is person-centered, right? Is trauma-informed, is not continue to push the stigma and violence against us. And so we're trying to train our own team, right, to know how to not only speak Hmong, right? Because a lot of them are second generation, like losing language, right? So like training them to speak Hmong, but also co-creating what LGBTQ terms could look like for us. And so that would be what I would say is like, if you are somebody that's connected to organizations and yeah, organizations, how do you think about creating all of that? And if you're not connected to it, I mean, you've learned a lot, right, from us today, hopefully. And how do you bring that back into your own life and your circle as well? Because oftentimes service isn't always the first place that communities like the ones we serve go to. They go to people like you who are part of the community, right? And not necessarily always attached to an organization, but because you know this, you can actually move them through to get services. And so a lot of the folks that get to us, it is word of mouth. And so you are a really big part of that as well.
I do want to elevate something that Shay just started her comments with that is so important. And that is, you know, I think about this all the time as an organizational leader, and I hope that other folks who run organizations on the call are very conscious of the fact that it is so important that you're bringing in those voices into your organization. Hire queer, BIPOC staff into your organization. Shay said something very important, that it shouldn't be the person necessarily who is, unless that is what they are called to do. They could be, you know, in a different program area, but what changes is the culture of an organization when you're bringing in those voices. And it is, representation matters, and it is so important to have those voices within an organization, because even if they're not doing that direct service work, even if they're not an advocate working with a specific subpopulation, they are still there adding that voice and adding that lens into the work of the overall organization. So just so critically important to think about some of those identities as you're thinking about who makes up your team and who are the decision makers on your team.
Okay, if I can also hop in, and then I know we're gonna go into Q&A. Just off of what you were saying, Say, and this is C. Michael speaking, what you're speaking about are policies and procedures to me, which is having those policies and procedures in place, not a hope or an assumption that the entire staff is on the same team, or that we share enough values that if someone comes in or something goes awry, we're all just going to instinctively respond in a way that's going to actually center the person, the victim survivor, who needs to be centered if harm happens. But to have policies and procedures, to have learning plans and consequences and clear roadmaps for if we're working with a victim survivor of violence who's LGBTQ+, and that person comes through our space and they experience discrimination or biphobia, transphobia, or homophobia from someone on staff or from another client that we're working with, we in advance have plans for what to do for that. Because often I think lots of organizations don't have those policies and procedures in place. So when, because when harm will eventually happen, wherever it is that we are, unfortunately, it's a piece of being a human being. If you live long enough, you will harm someone intentionally or unintentionally. So if we can plan for something will go awry, someone is not being thought of actively in our planning, in our procedures, and that person may come to us and say, ouch, that really hurt, or I needed more support and I didn't get it, or I found this person's response to me really harmful. Policies and procedures, like what do we do if staff are biphobic, homophobic, or transphobic to a victim survivor or to each other, right? Because we're not just serving LGBTQ+ people out in the world. We should be assuming that our teams also have folks, whether they're out to us or not out to us. And as well as the intake forms, sort of as you were saying, Say, of having asking for folks' name and pronouns and when to use them. So we recommend legal name, legal name if different than name listed above, pronouns, and when is it appropriate to use those. For example, among other staff, among other participants, if we're calling your house or speaking to your caregiver, if we're working with someone under the age of 18. As you said, 2 trainings, but absolutely having that not assumption that For example, and this would be a different example outside of LGBTQ plus specific experience. If someone on your team is Mexican and speaks Spanish and a client comes in who is not who would work with that person ordinarily, and you just assume that that person who's Mexican and speaks Spanish should go and work with that person just because they both speak Spanish, that is not what that person is hired for. Right? And that is asking that person to do more jobs than they're supposed to do. Often we as BIPOC folks, as LGBTQ plus folks, are already doing HR and playing multiple roles, doing multiple jobs, getting paid for one job, among our coworkers and among participants or among clients. So we want to make sure that we're centering folks in that. And then just accountability. Assume that harm will happen and learn how to put down your good intent. You might be like, oh, I assume that I didn't mean to, right? Doesn't matter. If you harm somebody, even unintentionally, we're wanting to center that harm. If I stomp on your foot by accident, I want to center you and your foot getting the care that you need and not, oh no, I didn't mean to stomp on your foot, right? Because that encourages someone to say, oh, it's okay, even if it's not, which could cause more harm. And then I would also just say assume that survivors are in the planning spaces that we're in, the LGBTQ plus folks are in the room, whether we know that or not, and to try to build spaces where it's normal for language to change for folks, whether that be once a month at our meetings, we still go around and say our names and pronouns, even if we've all been working here for 3 years, just to make sure that if something did change, there's a built-in opportunity for that person to share that without it being a whole big thing.
Okay, I really I want to add to this to say, to your point, I think about your example of like the Spanish speaking advocates. We see this all the time in our community, right? Mainstream organizations who bring in one culturally specific advocate, and they're working with all of that, right? And what we see is that oftentimes the advocates aren't actually supported, right? To say like, hey, how do we deepen your analysis around working with queer and trans folks? Because just because they're queer and trans doesn't mean they've done a lot of work, right? We've learned that a lot through our own work with Hmong advocates, right? And how are you taking care of that person after they've just been seeing like queer and trans people all day back to back talking about how they're experiencing violence? That does a lot of that impacts, right? That person, the queer and trans advocate. And so and this could be a totally different webinar next time, right? It's for us to talk about that. But the other thing I would add is first impression is so important. So how do you make your space welcoming, right? Like the minute they walk in, just don't have, I mean, the rainbow flag is great, but that can't be the only thing you have, right? What else is in your space that tells them this is safe, it's confidential, I have separate space where I could talk about it and people can't hear my conversations, right? The bathrooms, there might be gender bathrooms, but is there a bathroom where it's anybody could use it, right? All gender use, that I will feel safe in. And so thinking about even how you're crafting your physical space to be welcoming for folks. So that's the last thing I'll say.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sure we could keep going, but thank you again for all of your thoughts and expertise. If there are people, participants who have questions, I would love to have a chance for our panelists to answer those now. You can put them in the Q&A section. And let's see, just give a minute if we do have any questions coming in.
I do see one question in just the general chat.
Okay, yeah. How do we as advocates best advocate for a victim survivor in regards to polyamory? If one person is abusing multiple partners, when shelter spaces are for singles? It's a great question.
I can start, and I bet both of y'all probably have stuff too. One is that, of course, we always just want to move forward in whatever way that the victim survivor that we're working with at that given point wants us to. So we as advocates might notice, oh, actually, which has happened in our program and will happen again, there are multiple victim survivors who are talking about the same abuser or harm doer. We also have a responsibility in terms of confidentiality around that. So, one, making sure that we're asking, how does that person want to move forward? If that person is already aware of other victim survivors, what kind of relationship do they have with those other people? Have they already been in contact with those other folks? If they know who else is maybe in the relationship dynamic or who has been harmed by someone else, when we're talking about those sort of potted communities. If folks are, sometimes it's happened in our program where multiple victim survivors of the same harm doer or abuser know of each other already and are in communication separately outside of that space. We might ask if they'd like to share space. We might ask what unique, like how specifically that they want to move forward, each of them, not share any information among them. And make sure that we're getting consent to share any information. I think consent has been a theme also of our conversation today. Of making sure that we're not sharing anyone's information without asking them specifically, or letting that person name, I would like you to tell so and so X, Y, or Z thing, and not just taking their lead essentially. In terms of this question of like shelter spaces, it sort of depends. If there are multiple people who are partnered still and the person who is abusing or harming them, and they want to stay together in terms of a shelter space or a different space, that's where things like our program being able to offer short-term motel and hotel spaces could be for more than one person. We also try to make sure that folks' pets also have a place to go. There are many different programs in Minnesota, and I know Women's Advocates either just started a new one or has a different one, that the acronym is escaping me right now. But for folks who also just need to make sure that their pets are safe, because we know it's one of the reasons why folks sometimes won't leave a harmful dynamic, is because they're worried about their pets and where their pets will go. But our program can offer that sort of short-term motel, hotel, or Airbnb stay temporarily to try to find spaces, or find programs like Agate Housing, used to be St. Stephen's, has some housing resources that we tend to recommend for folks. They used to have well, actually, I don't know if that still exists. I'm not going to say it, but there used to be an LGBTQ plus specific housing program that I believe right now is on pause, but hopefully will come back, that we can recommend folks to and sort of buy that time with our program when folks are experiencing abuse or violence in that specific polyamory situation. And it depends on how many people are in that dynamic too. It might be more than 3, right? Sometimes we think polyamory is 3 people, but it might be more than that, where there might be people who are more sort of orbital, might come into the orbit sometimes and not be there all the time as well. I'm a little rambling towards
Yeah.
that.
No, I wasn't saying yes to you rambling. I think you're making incredible points. I wanted to add an extra layer onto this, and that is really that in some of our cultural practices, having multiple partners is a traditional practice. And so there is that extra layer of this that in, where there is an abuse of multiple partners, and it's multiple marriages within a household, and some of them are queer identifying, some of them are not, and so there is a lot of complexity around that. Generally, for our South Asian community, we, most of the shelters are not set up to serve our communities adequately. And so we have a lot of challenges with all of our clients going to shelter spaces. We have a really wonderful partner in Asian Women United that has a culturally specific shelter space, but then again, it makes it challenging for queer identifying folks who are seeking shelter space. They have a great setup where they include families, they include individual kitchens, because we have cultural and religious practices that require people to be able to cook their own food in a way that is important for them. And even beyond that, providing a sense of comfort, even if you don't have any dietary restrictions, just being able to have what you want when you want it is really important as well. And so what we have done is very similar to what C. Michael described. We do programming where we set up emergency housing. Oftentimes that's in the form of a hotel, and then up to 6 months of transitional housing based on our current programming. We would love to do more. If anyone knows of any, we're looking for longer term transitional housing funding. I'm going to put that pitch out there, but because we know that shelters are not considered a safe space for any members of our community. And so adding on in a layer of most shelters are set up with a specific gender identity in mind or a specific orientation in mind. It makes it too challenging to even go down that route. And so setting up flexible supports is core to our programming, because we know that it will not meet the needs of our community. There are just too many cultural, language barriers. There are, acceptance of queer identifying folks. There can be, it's so important to have spaces that are welcoming to them. And sometimes shelter spaces cannot, even if you are female identifying, a shelter space may not be a welcoming space for you. And so making sure that if that is what they choose, that we are getting them to a space that is safe and comfortable for them, and where they don't have to experience any additional violence, whether it is microaggressions about their appearance or their accent or any number of things that we hear all the time from our survivors. So making sure that we are having those flexible supports in place so that people can choose what feels comfortable for them and what feels safe for them, because the last thing we want is for them to send them to a place where they are harmed again.
Yeah, I think both of, what you both said, right? Because Hmong families, there's so many, there's like families who also practice polyamory, polygamy, right? So we're always thinking about that as well. And then blended families as well. And we just know that our families, sometimes have like 8 kids. And so, we've always been thinking about like, what are the solutions, right? Because it cannot just go to a shelter, because they're going to all get split up, or they can't be accommodated, right? And so we have had to use hotels and unfortunately Airbnbs as well, right? To say, hey, here, you need a kitchen so you can actually cook culturally specific food for your kids. And so we've always been thinking about that. And so it's an issue, I think, across the whole community, right? BIPOC communities, I would say, immigrant refugees.
All right, and thank you again for your answers. This is Ellie speaking. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So as we're reaching 3:30 here, if there are any final quick thoughts, but I really want to thank all 3 of you for spending your time sharing your expertise and helping to create more understanding and more sensitivity around queer victim survivors.
I'll say thank you all for being here. You didn't have to be here today. You don't have to be in this work. Lots of people opt out or are too in their own stuff to be able to support and help other folks. And this work can be really hard. It can feel really easy sometimes and feel really rewarding. Other times it can feel really hard to hold all of the pain and hurt and support that people need that they're not getting. And that need of support being so much greater than the capacity and the current resources. But you all chose to be here today, whether that be on YouTube later on or whether that be currently in the space. And that work of getting to know more about our communities, to be more inclusive, more welcoming, to center people, to ask questions and listen to the answers without our own biases or want for what people need or their experiences is so crucial. and I feel grateful that we're all in the space. If you need more training, if you have questions, we're all here. Whether, Transforming Generations website, I'm sure that you can get SAY's information. If you need to learn more about SEWA-AIFW, then I know that you can get more information there. OutFront.org is OutFront's website. Like, please think of us as a resource. From this point forward, if you need trainings or information, I know our websites have lots of trainings and resources, or resources on them, and resource lists. But thank y'all for being in this work. We don't do it alone. It's great to be in a space with others who are working to do it as well. So I feel grateful to be here with you.
I want to echo that. Thanks to everyone so much. OutFront and Transforming Generations are some of SEWA's really important partners. I know Shay and I are often the only people in the room doing some of the same work in a lot of spaces that we are in together. And so it is lonely work when you're representing the communities that we represent. And so it is really restorative to be in spaces where there's solidarity, where there are people who are outside of our communities who are interested in learning more about their needs is always really, really important. And I appreciate everyone who came here with an open heart and an open mind about how to better serve communities. And so thank you so much. And thank you so much for Standpoint for creating this space for us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
I was
want to
gonna
echo
say
that.
that. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you all.
here. Thank you, Ellie, for putting this together. It was a wonderful webinar. And we are almost out of time. We have 1 minute left. I just want to say thank you so much. And I hope I'll see everybody again next month for our next webinars. Thank you, interpreters, for being here. And I hope everybody have a great day.